Hey, welcome to Creepy Vibes. Today, we're heading deep into the heart of Texas, a place where the land stretches wide, the nights run long, and the stories, they stick with you long after the campfires burned out. You've probably heard about strange lights floating over dark rivers, shadows moving through empty woods, and people swearing they've seen things no one should ever see. These aren't just campfire tales. These are real experiences told by people who visited these parks and came back different. Or maybe didn't come back at all. But here's something weird. Most people who watch these stories never subscribe. I don't know why. They come here looking for a scare. They hear things that stay with them. And then they just disappear like they were never here. Don't be like them. Subscribe now. Stick around. Because today's stories, they're only the beginning. And before we dive in, where are you watching from? What time is it there? Drop it in the comments. I always like knowing who's out there with me, listening in the dark. All right, let's get started. The first time Ethan saw her, he thought it was just one of those things your eyes do when it's dark and the wind is making the trees talk and the river's moving like it's alive. He'd been out there at Pedernales Falls with his brother-in-law, a guy named Rick who drank too much and told stories too loud. And after 3 days of trying to bond over fishing and whiskey and failed attempts at making a decent fire, Ethan was ready to just walk into the woods and keep walking. But on that last night, with the sky wide open above them and the river crawling along like something old and tired, Ethan couldn't sleep. He left the tent around midnight, pulled on his boots without lacing them, and wandered down toward the water. The moon wasn't much help, hiding behind clouds like it was afraid to look down. Still, he could hear the river even if he couldn't really see it. The low scrape of water sliding over stone, the hush of it curling around rock outcroppings like fingers curling around a throat. He stood there a while, listening, smoking. The last cigarette he'd been saving for the ride home. That's when he noticed her. At first it was just a shape, pale and slow-moving at the edge of the riverbank, halfway swallowed up by the dark. He thought maybe it was fog or one of those tricks the night plays on you when you're tired and too alone with yourself. But then she stepped out from the black and into the gray, and he saw her dress dragging behind her in the mud, heavy and dark with water. Long sleeves, high collar, something that looked like lace still clinging in patches along her arms. He couldn't see her face, not really. The hair hung down in ropes like riverweed, covering most of it, and she kept her head tilted in a way that made it hard to tell if she even had eyes under there. Still, she moved like she was looking for something, stooping low sometimes like she was peering into the water, like she expected to see something staring back at her from beneath the surface. Ethan didn't say a word. He didn't move. Some deep animal part of him understood that you didn't speak to things like this. Not if you wanted to leave with all your pieces in the right place. After a minute, or maybe it was 10 time, felt wrong out there, she turned her head. Not all the way, just enough that he could see the bare edge of her cheek, pale and bloated like something left too long in the water. Her mouth hung a little open, slack and wet, and the sound she made wasn't speech but more like the sigh of the river itself, drawn up through lungs that didn't belong to the living anymore. Ethan backed away slow, careful not to break whatever fragile thread was holding this moment together. He didn't turn his back on her until he was halfway up the hill, and when he finally made it to the tent, he didn't wake Rick, didn't speak a word. He just lay there, eyes wide open, listening for footsteps that never came, listening to the river breathing through the dark like a woman weeping somewhere too far away to reach. In the morning, he figured it for a dream. That's what people do when they're afraid of something they can't explain. They fold it up and put it somewhere, small inside themselves, call it a dream, call it nothing, move on. He told himself that all the way home, told himself again when Rick dropped dead of a heart attack 2 weeks later, found face down in his bathtub, lungs full of water despite the fact that he hadn't run any, but it stayed with Ethan. Not just the image of her, not just the sound she made, but something colder, something deeper that seemed to follow him into every quiet moment after. He started having dreams about water creeping up through the floorboards of his house, about pale hands pressing against the glass of his windows from the inside. His wife left him. Said he'd gone strange, said he stared too long at nothing. Listened too hard for things no one else could hear. Years went by. Ethan stopped talking about the river, stopped talking much at all. People wrote him off as just another old drunk who couldn't let go of whatever ghosts he'd picked up along the way. He'd stopped going near water entirely, wouldn't take baths, wouldn't even wash dishes. He told himself it was over, though he knew better. He always knew better. And then, one night years later, decades maybe, he found himself back at Pedernales Falls. Couldn't say how he'd gotten there, whether he'd driven or walked or just woke up and there it was. The place hadn't changed much. Still that long stretch of flat gray rock like bones laid out to dry. Still the river whispering along like it knew every secret he'd ever tried to bury. And she was there. Standing in the water now, ankle deep, her dress still heavy with it, dragging behind her like something dead. This time she turned to face him full, and Ethan saw her eyes were just holes, black, soft, sinking into her face like rot into fruit. Her mouth moved but made no sound. She raised one hand, skin peeling away from the bone beneath, and pointed. Stepped forward without meaning to, without wanting to. The river lapped at his feet, cold as knives. He kept walking. Past his knees. Past his waist. The water wrapped him up like arms, pulled him slow and gentle down Dot in the morning. Rangers found his truck parked crooked near the overlook. No sign of Ethan, just footprints in the mud leading down to the water and nothing coming back. People said he'd wandered off, got lost, maybe fell in. Happens every so often, but some nights, when the clouds cover the moon just right and the river moves slow and dark, campers still talk about seeing a figure out there. Not the woman anymore. A man this time, dragging something heavy behind him in the current Dot, and if you get too close, they say he might look at you, might point, might ask you to help him find the one thing he never could let go of. Dot might even pull you under with him, just to keep from being so alone. They say there's something about the desert that can drive a man crazy if he listens to it too long. I used to think that was just cowboy talk, something old-timers said to keep greenhorns on edge. But then I spent 3 nights alone in Big Bend and learned the hard way that sometimes the desert talks back. It started with nothing more than a half-baked idea to get away for a while. My life back home had gotten messy in all the usual ways. Job unraveling, woman gone, debts stacking up like dirty dishes. I thought a few nights under the stars would clear my head, maybe even remind me of what mattered. Big Bend had always seemed like the kind of place where a man could still disappear, where the land was big and ancient enough to swallow all the noise from back home. The first night was uneventful, peaceful even. I camped near the Rio Grande, miles from the popular trails, pitched my little tent beside a patch of mesquite, and listened to the coyotes sing the sun down. The wind out there has a voice all its own, low and constant, whispering through the scrub like it's telling secrets to the dirt. I lay awake listening, watching the sky bleed stars until I finally drifted off. The second night was when things got strange. I'd hiked deep that day, past mule ears through canyons where the sun barely touched the ground and the air felt old, like it hadn't moved in 100 years. Somewhere between exhaustion and awe, I lost track of time. When I realized the light was going fast, I found a rocky outcrop and set up camp. I built a small fire with the deadwood I'd carried, cooked a can of beans, and leaned back to watch. The horizon burned down into purple. That's when I saw it. a flicker of light. Not far, maybe a mile, maybe less, just beyond a ridge that sloped down toward an arroyo. At first, I thought it was another hiker, someone else as stubborn or stupid as me to be this far off trail. But the fire was wrong. It burned too steady. No flicker from wind, no smoke rising. Just a dull orange glow like a lantern stuck on. Lo, curiosity got the better of me. I packed my gear and headed toward it. The terrain wasn't easy. Loose rock, thorny scrub, gullies that seemed to shift beneath my boots, but I kept moving, kept watching that steady glow between the hills. The closer I got, the more certain I became it was a campfire. I could almost hear it, the faint hiss and pop of burning wood, the low murmur of flames licking dry kindling. But when I reached the spot, there was nothing there. No fire, no tent, no sign of anyone at all. Just a blackened circle of stones, the ashes. Inside still warm, I knelt down, touched the ground. Warm, like it had burned only moments ago. I even smelled it, that sharp, ghostly trace of smoke. But there was no wood left, no embers, no footprints except my own. The wind was dead still. The night pressed in close and heavy, like something. Watching from just beyond the dark, I told myself it was nothing. Some old camp I'd stumbled onto by chance, still holding the heat of the day. I headed back to my site, trying not to let the silence get under my skin. But something had shifted. The desert felt aware, like it had noticed me, like it was watching to see what I'd do next. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I kept hearing things out in the brush, soft footsteps, the snap of twigs, something. Breathing slow and steady just beyond the ring of firelight. More than once I sat up fast, flashlight in hand, sweeping the dark for eyes. I never found anything. Not tracks, not movement, not even the wind to blame. By dawn, I'd have convinced myself it had all been nerves. The third night proved me wrong. Moved camp again, deeper still, toward the edges of the park where few bothered to go. I wanted distance from whatever had rattled me the night before, though in truth I think I just wanted answers. I didn't build a fire that night. Something about flame felt inviting, like it drew things in. Instead, I sat in the dark with my back to a rock face, chewing cold jerky and watching the stars slide slow across the sky. That's when I saw it again. Not one fire this time, but three, all in a crooked line across the hills, each one steady. And low, burning like lanterns in glass jars. Too even. Too precise. Not the way people camp out here. And they weren't there a minute before. I watched them blink into being like someone lighting matches one by one. Against every shred of common sense, I went toward them. Something about it felt inevitable. Like I wasn't deciding so much as obeying. The ground grew rougher as I climbed. The scrub pulling at my jeans, rocks sliding loose beneath my boots. My flashlight gave out halfway there, the batteries cold and dead though they'd been new 2 days before. Still, I pressed on, drawn toward those lights. When I reached the ridge, I saw them clear for the first time. Fires, yes. Campfires, circled with stone, low flames licking at blackened wood. But no people, no gear, no footprints in the dust. Just 3 fires burning steady under a sky full of indifferent stars, and around them, the ground was wrong. The rocks were arranged in shapes I didn't recognize, not circles, not squares, but patterns that seemed to shift if I looked too long. Lines that bent where they shouldn't, curves that led nowhere. And in the center of each pattern, those fires burned in absolute silence. No crackle, no smoke, just heat and light and the smell of something sweet rotting beneath it. I should have run. God knows I wanted to, but my feet wouldn't move. I felt pinned there, like the desert itself held me in place. Like those fires had opened a door and something on the other side was looking through. And then they went out, not all at once, but in sequence. First the far left, then the right, then the center. Like someone snuffing candles with careful fingers. Darkness rushed in, thick and fast, swallowing the shapes on the ground, swallowing me. When I came to, I was back at my camp. No memory of walking there, no sense of how much time had passed. My pack was still zipped, my water untouched. My boots caked in red dust from hills I hadn't crossed. The fire pit beside me was cold. I didn't wait for dawn. I packed my things in silence and hiked out under a moonless sky, every shadow stretching too long, every rock whispering beneath my steps. I didn't stop until I hit the park boundary, didn't speak until I reached the first gas station on the edge of nowhere and ordered coffee with shaking hands. The man behind the counter looked at me like he knew. Said something about how folks go missing out there sometimes, how search parties find their camps but never their bodies. How sometimes they find the fires still burning, circle of warm ashes with no wood in sight. I didn't answer. Just paid and left, drove until the sun was high and the desert felt far behind. But some nights, when the wind comes in just right, I still smell it, that faint, sweet stink of something burned too long. And I wonder how many others have followed. Those lights, thinking they were only fires. Wonder how many never came back. Wonder what's waiting on the other side of the dark, watching. Patient as stone. Wonder if it's still out there, lighting fires just for me. They say there's a tree out near Inks Lake that howls when the wind hits it just right. Folks around Burnett and the little towns scattered through the hill country whisper about it like it's just another old ghost story meant to spook kids at church camp or scare tourists sitting too close to the fire. But if you live out there long enough, you start to notice how the story always circles back to one thing: drowning. Not just any drowning either. The oak only howls on nights when someone's been taken by the lake. Didn't believe any of it until the summer my cousin Tyler went missing. We grew up out there, me and him, running barefoot through cedar breaks and sneaking down to the water with old rods and six-packs we'd stolen from our uncles. Inks Lake wasn't big by Texas standards, but it had a strange reputation for being deeper than it looked. Cool and black, even in August heat. Fishermen sometimes joked the bottom went all the way to hell. People had gone under before, sure. Canoe flipped, motor stalled, fool jumped from a cliff too drunk to swim. They'd usually turn up bloated and pale after a day or two. But not Tyler. He was last seen walking the bank alone near Devil's Waterhole, that deep cut of blue limestone and shadowed rock where the bravest kids dove from cliffs in the afternoons. Someone heard him yelling, maybe laughing. Then nothing. His truck was still parked near the trailhead the next morning, keys sitting on the seat like he meant to come back. The water patrol dragged the cove for days. Divers went down with ropes and flashlights and came back shaking their heads. Like he just vanished, they said. My aunt wailed herself hoarse. My uncle drank himself silent. 3 days after they called off the search, I sat up drinking alone by the water. Something about grief makes you stupid, makes you think you can solve things by brute force. I was mad at the lake, mad at myself for not being there that night. I was trying to finish a bottle of Evan Williams when I heard it. A sound I'd never heard in all my years out there. It wasn't the wind through reeds or the low whistle of water against stone. It was deeper, older, a long, hollow groaning that started somewhere high and twisted down slow, like something in pain pulling itself out of the ground. It came from across the water, near that gnarled oak tree leaning out over the bank like it was about to fall in. Folks called it the howling oak, but I'd always figured that was just kids talking. A dead thing, half hollow, full of termites and rot. But it wasn't the tree that sounded hollow. It was the air around it. Like the tree's throat went down to someplace worse than earth. I sobered up quick. packed my bottle, my light, and my stupid bravado, and paddled across in my old aluminum canoe. I tied off near the roots. That tree looked wrong in the moonlight. Bark blackened, branches bent toward the water like fingers on a dying man. I told myself it was just rot, just age, but standing there under it, I could feel something breathing. Through the wood. Not air exactly. Not wind. Something slower. Hungrier. The sound started again, and this time I swear to God I heard a name in it. Not words like we speak, not clear, but something stretched through that hollow timber that sounded like Tyler. Not once, but over and over. Soft and curling, like water through teeth. I should have left. Any smart man would have. But grief makes you stupid, and guilt makes you braver than you ought to be. I stepped closer, laid a hand against the bark. Cold. Not cool like night air, but cold like stone sunk deep beneath black water. My skin crawled, my stomach flipped, and beneath my hand something moved. Not the tree. Something inside it. I yanked back just as the wind came up sharp and sudden. The oak shuddered. The howling split wide and deep. And then, I swear to you, something came out. Not a man, not an animal. Not anything with shape you'd want to name. It poured like smoke and bone from the split in the trunk, dragging with it the stink of wet things buried deep. I stumbled back, tripped over a root, landed hard on my elbow. My flashlight spun out across the dirt, beam catching on something pale tangled in the roots. A hand, human, bloated and blue. I scrambled up, heart hammering, mouth too dry to scream. The smoke twisted higher, unraveling into something that looked like Tyler but wasn't. Same shape, same shaggy hair and sunburned neck. But his face was wrong, hollowed, skin like old paper floating on water, eyes black from lid to lid, and his mouth open too wide like it wanted to swallow the moon. I don't remember running. I don't remember getting back to the canoe or paddling blind through the reeds. I just remember the sound following me, not the wind, not the tree, but my cousin's ruined voice pulled through a throat that wasn't his anymore. Calling my name now, over and over, soft. Patient. I locked myself in my truck until dawn. Didn't sleep, didn't drink, just waited for light. When I went back later, the hand was gone. The roots too clean, like nothing had ever been caught. There at all. I didn't tell my aunt. I didn't tell my uncle. I didn't tell anyone for years, but sometimes, late at night when the wind cuts across the water just right, I still hear it. That howling, low and hungry. And beneath it, a name. Not Tyler anymore, mine. The man who told me this story swore it wasn't just the wind. Said it wasn't shadows either, not in the normal sense. His name was Hal, and when I met him, he looked like hell. Beard overgrown, face drawn thin like meat pulled too tight. Overbone, teeth yellow like old pages. He was a park ranger once, down at Lost Maples, before whatever happened to him out there sent him wandering and half mad. You'd find him most days sitting alone at the end of the bar at Jody's place off Highway 337, nursing Shiner box and scaring off the tourists with stories about things in the woods. People thought he was just lonely, or drunk, or both, but I listened, because sometimes a man's voice carries a weight you can't fake. It started with campers. Always does. College kids mostly, or retired couples looking for peace and quiet among the maples that burned red in fall like slow coals. Sometimes families, sometimes loners. They'd come into the ranger station and sign their names and take the pamphlets. And maps, the ones with cheerful arrows and suggestions like Sunset Ridge or Pecan Hollow Trail. They never asked about the woods at night. Nobody does. Hal said he noticed it around his third season out there. Patterns. Names that showed up on Monday but didn't check out by Sunday. Cars left long past the permits. Tents gone to ruin, half swallowed by leaf mold and rain. Sometimes, you could tell the people had just left, sleeping bags still zipped, coffee still in the percolator, chairs facing empty fire pits. Other times it looked like they'd never been there at all, just the name on the ledger and a rectangle of flattened grass where a tent used to be. Hal went looking, of course. That was his job. He said it always started the same way. You'd step off the trail, just a little ways in. You'd think you were going straight, but something in the trees bent your path without you knowing. The sun would hang lower than it should, even if it was only noon. The light would go wrong. Not darker, exactly. Not lighter either, just thin, gray, like the bones of light picked clean. That's when you'd hear it. First, it was footsteps. Behind you, off to the side, never ahead. Never crossing your path, always keeping pace. You'd stop and they'd stop. You'd walk and they'd walk. You might even call out if you had the guts. Hello? Hey, is someone there? Nothing answers. Not at first, Hal said. He followed one of those trails once, back before he knew better. They were supposed to lead somewhere. An old campsite maybe, or a clearing, or a deer blind. But they never did. They just wound deeper, tighter, curling in on themselves like something alive and lazy, waiting to choke. That's when he saw them. Tall things, fence posts, pale where the sun caught them through the leaves. Not white exactly, but bone-colored. Off-white, unwashed. Heads too small, too far back on necks too long. Faces he couldn't describe, because looking at them made his stomach flip like a dead fish in water. No eyes, maybe, or too many. He wasn't sure. But he knew this. They watched. Not curious, not afraid, not even hungry. Just waiting. Like rocks under a river, patient and permanent and certain you'd come close enough eventually. They never chased. That was the worst part. They didn't have to. They stood where the trees thickened, where the maples leaned together like gossiping old women with red-veined fingers. Sometimes you'd see them shift, lean closer without moving their feet. Sometimes you'd hear them, not breathing, not speaking, but something in between, a kind of slow, wet sighing that moved through the leaves without stirring them. Hal said he left markers. Little stone piles, plastic tape, GPS pings. None of them stayed where he left them. Not once. And the deeper he went, the closer those things seemed to lean, like they were guiding him inward, urging him toward something deeper, blacker beneath. The route stopped one time. He found a tent. Not old, not ruined. New, fresh, unzipped, half open like a mouth. Inside, nothing. No gear, no packs, no names scrawled on permits. Just soil, damp, turned over like something had clawed its way up from it. Underneath instead of settling down from above. He ran that day. Ran until the trees thinned, until the maples gave way to cedar, and cedar gave way to road. Never looked back. Never went in alone again. Others weren't so lucky. A woman once, mid-30s, left a voicemail for her sister from somewhere. Out past the East Trail. Said she thought she was lost but could still hear traffic. Thought she saw people moving between the trees. Didn't sound scared. Just confused. They found her phone wedged in the crook of a maple branch 20 feet up. No sign of her. A kid too, younger than 10. Went missing while his parents set up camp. 1 second he was skipping stones at the creek. Next he was gone. Prince. Led up the bank, into the woods, stopped clean in the middle of nothing. Like he'd been lifted, Hal started marking his maps different after that. Not the official ones, his own. Little X's where things felt wrong. Circles where the air pressed heavy on his chest like a hand. Lines where he thought those pale shapes. Moved when the sun dipped low. He kept them to himself. Showed me once, late at night, tracing paths with a shaking finger. Said it looked like roots, didn't it? Like something buried deep was growing out up through the soil and rock and trees. Sighed maybe the maples weren't red for autumn. Maybe they were bleeding. He doesn't go near lost maples now. Won't drive past it. Won't speak its name if he can help it. When he dreams, he says, it's always the same, the woods bending. In the ground opening like a mouth, and those thin pale shapes watching, waiting, knowing he'll come back eventually. We all do. That's what they want. That's what they're made for. He says they're patient. Older than the trees, older than bones, older than fear itself. They wait beneath, under roots, under rock, under blood. They wait for the light to fail and the path to vanish. They wait for you to step wrong. They wait because they know something you done single quotes T. No one leaves lost maples. Not really, not all of you. Not the parts that matter, and you can laugh if you want. Most people do. Most people think shadows don't watch. Most people think the trees are just trees. But you haven't heard the sighing. You haven't stood at the edge of the trail and felt something waiting beneath your feet. You haven't seen how the red leaves fall like ash, slow and soft, covering footprints that don't belong to anything human. Not yet. They said it was just a story, something old cowboys made up after too many beers and too many lonely nights sitting by the dying glow of a campfire in Palo Duro Canyon. Folks whispered it around RV parks and campgrounds, told it to scare newcomers. Passed it around like folklore, harmless and dumb, like stories about Bigfoot or the Chupacabra. They called them the knockers. Said they'd come around after midnight, light as fingertips, tapping and scratching at your RV doors, your tent poles, even your car windows. Some said it was wind, some said coyotes. But everyone agreed on one thing. If you hear the knocking, don't open the door. Jason didn't believe in any of that. He was a practical man, a retired oil worker from Midland who had spent his life working dangerous jobs in dangerous places. He wasn't scared of some half-baked legend passed down by drunk ranchers. His wife Ellen had heard the stories too, but she only smiled and rolled her eyes when they checked into the campsite near the canyon's rim. It was late October, the off-season, and they practically had the whole park to themselves. The wind carried a dry bite that hinted winter was waiting just out of sight. The canyon stretched below them like a rust-colored scar, vast and empty and silent except for the occasional cry of a hawk. The first night passed without incident. They grilled steaks, drank a little too much red wine, and sat under the bridle. Stars wrapped in flannel blankets. Jason thought about how good retirement had been to them, how peaceful things finally felt. No more blowouts on rigs, no more foreman breathing down his neck, no more nights spent wondering if some piece of rusted pipe would snap and send him to an early grave. Just quiet nights like this, alone with Ellen and the canyon. The second night, it happened. He woke up around 2:30 a.m. to the softest sound. Tap, tap, tap. At first, he thought it was a branch against the RV. The wind had picked up after sunset, whistling low through the canyons like something ancient and tired. He lay there, eyes open in the dark, listening. Tap, tap, tap. 3 short raps, not random. Not the wind. Intentional, deliberate. He sat up slowly, careful not to wake Ellen. She slept hard these days, helped along by her nighttime pills and half a glass of wine. Jason pulled on a pair of sweatpants, slipped his feet into his sneakers, and eased to the door without turning on a light. He pressed his ear against the thin metal silence, then dash tap 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 right there. Right on the other side, he held his breath. Something about it wasn't right. A person would have knocked harder, called out. A coyote wouldn't knock at all. He unlocked the deadbolt quietly, twisted the knob, and yanked the door open fast. Nothing. The wind slapped cold against his face. The dirt lot stretched empty under the pale light of a distant lamppost. He stepped outside, looked around. The nearest camper was at least half a mile down the road, and the ranger station was dark. No footprints in the dirt. No animals lurking. Nothing but his own breath puffing out white in the chill. He went back inside, locked the door, and told himself. It was his imagination, but the next night it happened again. This time it was louder. More urgent. The knocks came fast, tap, 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 like small, sharp fingers running across the metal skin of the RV. Ellen heard it too. She sat up beside him, eyes wide and scared in the dark. Jason, what is that? I don't. No. Don't open the door, she whispered. Don't. They sat there, frozen, listening. The knocking moved. From the door to the window beside the kitchenette. Then to the tiny bathroom vent. Tap, tap, tap. Like something crawling slowly across the outside, testing every seam, every latch, every weakness. Jason wanted to turn on the lights, wanted to throw open the door and yell, but something about the rhythm of it stopped him. It didn't sound human. It didn't sound like anything with flesh and bones. It sounded patient. It sounded hungry. The knocking stopped just before dawn. Neither of them slept. In the morning, Jason walked the perimeter of the RV. No tracks. No scratches. No signs anyone had been there at all. He asked the ranger about it when they drove down to pick up more firewood. The man just gave him a tired smile. Y'all heard him, huh? The knockers. Happens this time of year. Always. Does. What are they? The ranger shrugged. No one knows. Old stories say that the souls of Comanche scouts still out there looking for trespassers. Some say it's folks who died in the canyon falling, hunting, getting lost trying to get back in. Others think it's just the wind playing tricks. Whatever it is, don't answer when they come knocking. That's all I'll tell you. Jason wanted to laugh it off, but something in the ranger's eyes stopped him. That night, they double-checked. The locks, closed every curtain, left the porch light burning. Ellen wouldn't even brush her teeth alone. She kept glancing at the door like she expected it to burst open at any second. At exactly 3 a.m. The knocking started again. It was louder than before, angrier. The whole RV seemed to shiver with it. Tap, 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 circled them, fast. And frantic door, window, roof, vent. Something heavy thumped against the back hatch, shaking the ladder. Jason held Ellen's hand so tight she whimpered, and then something spoke. Not in words, not exactly, but in sound. A scraping, groaning, noise like wood dragging across bone. A long, low moan that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound of something ancient and furious waking up beneath them. Ellen started to cry. Jason sat there, heart hammering, sweat running down his back, and realized the knocking wasn't trying to get in. It was inviting them out. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Eventually, the sounds faded. They left the next morning without saying goodbye to the ranger. They drove straight through to Amarillo and booked a motel for the night, somewhere flat and bright and crowded with people. Neither of them mentioned the knockers again, but sometimes, weeks later, long after they'd gotten home, Jason would wake in the dead of night to the sound of tapping, on the bedroom window, on the bathroom door, on the glass of the picture frame beside his bed. Light as fingertips. Patient. Waiting. They say it started in the late 90s, maybe earlier. Depends on who you're talking to and how drunk they are when they tell it. Lake Livingston's big enough you can get lost out there without really trying, and deep enough in places that what sinks doesn't always come back. That's the way the old-timers put it. And you can tell by the way they look out across the water when they say it, like they're seeing something far off. Something they'd rather forget. It's mostly fishermen who talk about the boy. The drowned boy, they call him, like it's his official name, something carved in stone. I first heard about him from a man named Henry Lyle who ran the bait shop near the South Boat Ramp. I was 17, working weekends for beer money and trying to act like I didn't scare easy. Henry was the kind of man who'd laugh without smiling, yellow teeth behind cracked lips, always chewing the same piece of gum until it turned gray. He told me about the boy one evening just before closing, while the sky burned down to dark over the water and the crickets started up. "You hear him yet?" Henry asked, leaning over the counter like we were swapping secrets. Laughing, like a little kid playing tag or something. Comes from the docks when it's good and quiet after the sun's down, like now. I said no, I hadn't heard anything like that. He just smiled and said, "You will." I didn't believe him, not really. But that's how these things get into your head, isn't it? Little cracks in the foundation you don't notice right away. Couple weeks later, I was out there by myself, just screwing around near the docks, casting lines I didn't expect to catch anything on. Water slick and black under the moon wind, soft like breath on the back of your neck. I wasn't thinking about Henry or his story, not until I heard it, a laugh. Clear, high, and close enough I thought someone's kid had snuck up behind me, but there wasn't anyone. Not on the dock, not on the shore, just me and the lake and that sound hanging in the air like smoke. I told myself it was nothing, some bird maybe, echo off the water. Didn't matter. I packed up and left faster than I probably needed to. Next day, Henry asked me again, "You hear him yet?" This time I just nodded. He didn't smile. Sighed. Don't answer him if he talks. That's the trick. Folks that answer don't come back up. The stories went like this. A voice asks you to swim. Always polite, always cheerful, like he's just a lonely kid looking for a friend. You can say no, you can walk away, you can pretend you didn't hear. But if you say yes, if you even think yes deep down, you're done. Water takes you fast. No splash, no struggle. Just gone. They said it happened to a guy named Wesley Hart in '02, drunk off his ass, sitting out there with a cooler and a tackle box, trying to piss off his ex-wife by ignoring his court-ordered weekend with their daughter. Last anyone saw. He was laughing, talking to himself, people thought. Then he walked off the dock like he was stepping onto solid ground. Never came back up. Cops figured he slipped. Everyone else knew better. Same thing with Lori Vance, teenager from over in Huntsville. Summer night, party by the boat ramp. Friends dared her to swim out past the marker lights. Said she'd heard the boy laughing first. Sod she laughed back. They never found her body. Just her sandal, floating there like it was waiting. You'd think people would stop coming. They don't. Lake's too pretty, too big, too old to scare folks off for long. The rangers don't talk about it. Bad for tourism. But you notice they pull the boats in before dusk, clear the docks early. You notice they don't laugh when someone says the name. I stayed on with Henry for another year. I heard the boy half a dozen more times. Never answered. Never even looked toward the sound. That's another part of it, see? He comes closer. If you look, like you're giving him permission without realizing. One night, real late, I heard him plain as day, voice right under the dock boards. "Will you swim with me?" he asked. Sweet as pie, young, but not too young. Maybe 8, 9 years old. The kind of voice that trusts everybody. I didn't answer. Not out loud, but I thought about it. About what it would feel like, the water closing over me, the quiet down there. About letting go of everything hard and ugly in the world and just sinking, until there's nothing left of you but bubbles. For half a second, it sounded peaceful. Then I remembered what Henry said. That's the trick. I left right then. Quit the job the next morning. Didn't say why. Years pass. I moved on, moved south, got married, got old. But every so often, I think about that lake. I think about the people still fishing there, still hearing that laugh float out across the dark. Sometimes I wonder if Henry's still alive. Probably not. But if he is, I bet he still leaves before sunset. They say the boy's getting bolder now. Not just laughing, not just asking. They say he follows people up onto the shore, watches from the tree line, wet footprints in the dirt where no kids. Supposed to be. They say he's lonely, he's hungry, he's patient. Sooner or later, someone always says yes. I never wanted to go back to Caddo Lake. Not after what happened in '89, not after the screaming. But you know how it is, you get older, things start to lose their sharp edges. Memories fade or blur. You think maybe you exaggerated them. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed when you were young. Maybe it was just swamp gas, or the heat, or the whiskey, or the dark. People tell themselves things like that because they need to sleep at night. Caddo Lake isn't the kind of place you'd expect ghosts to hang around. It's too wet, too loud with bugs and frogs, too alive. But that's exactly why they do. I think that place is ancient. Older than Texas. Older than man. Spanish moss hangs off the cypress trees like the skin of the dead, and the water never stops moving, even when the air's dead still and so hot you feel like you're breathing through wet cloth. Things disappear in that water. Things sink down into the black and don't come back. Sometimes not even bones. The cabin wasn't much to look at even before it burned. Just some gray boards slapped together on rotting stilts above the shallows, hidden deep past where the boat tours go. My Uncle Ray took me out there when I was a kid. Said it belonged to an old man named Grover Minton, a drunk who lived alone and trapped catfish and gar for a living. Folks said he wasn't right in the head. Talked to things that weren't there. Talked to the lake, mostly. Some said he had a girl living out there with him too, a girl nobody ever saw in town. A girl he kept locked up. They found the place burning one night. Fire licking up out of the windows, smoke curling up into the trees. No roads led out there. The sheriff had to come by boat. By the time he did, it was nothing but glowing embers and smoke so thick it curled inside your lungs and made you cough up black strings. They never found Grover's body. Never found the girl either, if there was one. But 3 different men swore they heard screaming. Not just during the fire, but after, days after. Screams rising up out of the water like something drowning. Something still burning beneath the surface. Ray told me that part in a whisper, sitting out on the dock with a line in the water and a cigarette burning down to nothing in his hand. Told me if I ever saw lights over that spot, I was to keep the hell away. He said they weren't lights. He said they were mouths. I didn't believe him. Not really, but I never forgot it either. Not even when I left Texas for good, or thought. I had. Not even when Ray died and left me his boat and his cabin and his debts. Coming back wasn't my idea. It was my wife's. She thought we needed to reconnect with nature. I didn't tell her what kind of nature lived out here. Not until it was too late. The first night was fine. Hot, sticky, full of mosquito bites and cheap beer. We sat out on the dock listening to the frogs and the hum of things with wings, watching the trees swallow up the stars. She thought it was romantic. I thought it sounded like the whole swamp was breathing in the dark. You can laugh if you want. City people always do. It was the second night when I saw them again. Those lights. We'd been fighting, nothing serious, just the usual. Married stuff. Silence settled thick between us, and she went inside to sulk or read or whatever. I stayed out with the bugs and the beer, staring at the black water that stretched out like oil beneath the moon. And then I saw them. Orange. flickering, floating low over the place where Grover's cabin had been. No structure left now, not even pilings, just open water. Open, but not empty. They moved like fireflies at first, drifting, darting. Then they started rising, slow like smoke pulling itself upward, taking shape. I saw faces in those lights, mouths open wide, eyes hollow. Black pits. The lights pulsed, swelled, and from across the water came the sound I'd buried deep for 30 years, screaming. Not human screaming, not quite. It sounded like people, yes, but stretched thin, hollowed out, twisted through water and flame and time. Screams that rose up and echoed and spun like smoke around my head until I realized I was standing. I didn't remember standing. My feet were already wet. The dock behind me looked far away. Something moved beneath the lights. Long, pale shapes, rippling just beneath the surface. Arms, I thought at first. Then no, too long, too thin, too many joints. Like the legs of spiders big enough to eat a man whole. They broke the surface, reaching. They weren't pulling themselves up. They were feeling, searching, reaching for something warm. Something breathing. I stumbled back, splashing, falling hard onto the dock's boards. The lights blinked out. The screaming stopped like a hand had clamped over it. Only the frogs and the bugs went on. My wife came to the door, frowning, asking if I was drunk again. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mouth wouldn't work right. Next morning, I told her we were leaving. I didn't explain why. She fought me on it, of course. Said she liked it there. Sighed I was letting ghosts run my life. Maybe I was. Maybe I still am. But that night, she went out on the dock alone. I woke up to the door creaking. Saw her pale shape moving down toward the water, slow, like sleepwalking, like being led. I followed, calling her name, soft at first, then louder. She didn't turn. She didn't even flinch. The lights were back, floating over the ruins. Brighter this time, sharper, like blades made of flame, and they were moving, drifting toward her, toward us. The screaming started again. She stepped into the water. I grabbed her, pulled her back, hard enough to leave bruises. I don't remember getting back to the house. I don't remember the night ending. But in the morning she had scratches on her legs. Long, thin scratches, like fingers made of wire had tried to pull her down. We left Caddo Lake behind. Left Ray's boat, his debts, his ghosts. Sold the cabin cheap to a man from Houston who said he didn't believe in stories. I wonder if he still doesn't. Sometimes I still see her standing at the window, staring east. Sometimes I wake up to the sound of screaming, and it takes me a minute to remember where I am. But it always sounds like it's coming from the water, from a cabin that isn't there anymore. They say fire cleanses. I don't think that's true. Not out there. Out there, fire just feeds it. Out there, fire doesn't end a thing. It just gives it shape, gives it voice, gives it hunger. Stay away from those lights if you ever see them. They're not lights, they're mouths. Huntsville State Park isn't the kind of place you think about when you hear ghost stories. It's too green, too clean, too normal. Miles of pine trees, neat little campsites, kids laughing by the lake in the daytime. Families come here to fish, to paddle around in canoes, to roast marshmallows under the warm Texas sky. But things change after dark. Ask anyone who's ever hiked those back trails at night, the ones twisting deep into the woods where the lake can't be seen anymore, and the sound of the highway is long gone. They'll tell you about the feeling first, how the trees seem to lean in, how the wind feels colder than it should, how the woods seem to press down on you like a hand to the back of the neck. And if they're drunk enough or scared enough, they'll tell you the rest, about the yellow eyes. About the crawling thing, I didn't believe any of that crap. I'm not a superstitious man. I work maintenance for the park. I fix busted toilets, patch roofs, clear brush. I've been out on those trails more times than I can count, day and night. The worst I'd seen before last summer was a copperhead, stretched across a footpath, and one skinny meth head with a knife he was too high to use. Nothing supernatural about either, but I remember what my grandfather used to say. Out in East Texas, where he raised hounds for hunting, don't pay too much mind to what a man says. Pay mind to what the dogs won't chase. Last summer we had trouble with the trails. Something digging holes near the lake. Not raccoons or armadillos. These were deeper, wider, like something was burrowing with hands, not paws. At first I figured kids. Bored teenagers making fire pits where they shouldn't. But the rangers started complaining about noises at night. Not coyotes, not hogs, something bigger. Something that scraped. I should have left it alone. Should have filed my reports and let Parks and Wildlife handle it. But pride's a funny thing. I'd been working those woods 20 years and I didn't. Like the idea of something crawling around out there that I didn't understand. So one night, late August, I took my flashlight, my old .38, and I walked those trails alone. Started near Raven Lodge, headed south past the lake, deeper where the pines get thick and the moss hangs down like old gray curtains. Moon was up, but not much use. Those trees eat light out about 2 miles in. I started hearing it. Not footsteps. Not really. Something between a slither and a scuttle. Like wet rope dragging or something soft pulling itself forward inch by inch. I stopped, shined my light. Nothing but underbrush, trees like black bones against the sky. Walked on. Heard it again, closer this time. Same direction I was heading, another. Half-mile and I saw them. Eyes. Yellow, low to the ground, watching me between the brambles. Not glowing, not like a flashlight trick. Reflective. Animal eyes. But wide apart. Too wide for a raccoon, too low for a deer. I raised the gun. Stupid, really. You can't shoot something you can't see. I called out, "Come on then, show yourself." Nothing moved. Not at first. Then, slow as rot, it came crawling forward, not upright. Not running, crawling. Arms, legs, belly to the dirt. Pale skin stretched over bone like wax left too long in the sun. Hair in patches. Mouth open but no breath, no sound. Just those yellow. Eyes locked on me like I owed it something. I froze. Couldn't help it. Thing about fear no one tells you. It's not screaming or running. It's standing still because your brain hasn't caught up to what your eyes are seeing. It stopped. 10 feet off. Tilted its head like a dog listening. Then it grinned. Teeth too many, too sharp. Not human teeth. Not right. And it spoke. Not loud, not clear. Just a whisper, thick and wet, curling up out of its throat. Found you. That broke me. I fired. Twice, didn't care where the shots went. Turned and ran like hell back the way I came. Dropped the flashlight somewhere behind me. Didn't stop until the lights of the lodge burned through the trees like salvation. They found me in the morning. Passed out behind the maintenance shed, blood on my hands from where I'd fallen. Gun empty. Rangers went looking. Said they found the holes again, deeper now. Wider. Something had been moving through the brush all night. They didn't ask questions. When I put in for medical leave the next day. Didn't press when I handed in my keys a month later. I don't go near those woods anymore. Not at night, not alone. You hear stories now and then. Campers talking about something crawling past there. Tense. Something watching from the trees. Some say it's a spirit, something old and angry from before we put fences around nature and called it ours. Some say it's just a trick of the light, nerves out in the dark, but I know better. I saw it, I heard it, and I don't give a damn what you believe. Just don't walk those trails after sundown. Not unless you want to see what's it been waiting. Not unless you want to know why it grins. They tell that story to every new hire at Guadalupe Mountains National Park, not because they want to scare you, though they know it'll get under your skin, but because somewhere deep down, they believe it themselves. The veterans say it like a joke at first. If you hear whistling after dark, don't answer. Then, quieter, they add, the last one who did walked off into the cliffs and was never seen again. They don't put that in the official training manuals, of course. It's one of those things passed down in the break room over cheap coffee and stale donuts, told while everyone watches the sun sink behind El Capitan, flattening the desert into a bruised sheet of violet and black. They'll laugh about it, but not too loud. You can tell by the way their eyes shift toward the cliffs. They're waiting for something. Or listening. I didn't believe it at first. Why would I? I grew up on campfire stories, Boy Scouts nonsense. My uncle used to scare us with tales about skinwalkers and ghost miners. I figured this was just the Park Service version. A spooky tale to haze the rookies. But there's a difference between stories you hear at summer camp and the ones that come wrapped in silence, handed down like a warning from men who've hiked every inch of this unforgiving terrain. It wasn't my first season out here. I knew the desert. I knew the trails. I knew the way the wind could whistle through the arroyos and make you think you weren't alone. But the whistle they talked about wasn't the wind. They said it was too human, too steady. A long, slow rising note, then a pause, then falling again. Like some old ranch hand calling his dog home in the dusk. I didn't hear it until October. Nights get mean in October, high up where the scrub gives way to bare rock and the wind slices through your jacket like teeth. I'd pulled the late shift, radio patrol, checking trailheads, making sure no idiot campers wandered too far from the designated sites. By midnight, I was alone, parked at Free Joel Ranch, writing up notes in my truck. Radio static, a thermos of lukewarm coffee, the soft grind of gravel under boot when I got out to stretch my legs. That's when I heard it low at first, like it was carried on the breeze. A soft whistle, rising, falling, coming from somewhere, up toward the dark slope of Guadalupe Peak. I stood there like an idiot, half listening, half telling myself it was nothing. Some night bird maybe, or the wind through a crack in the stone, but I knew better. I'd heard the wind in this place 1,000 times. I knew its voice. This wasn't it. This was something else. Something deliberate. The radio on my belt crackled. Once, then went silent. I remember looking down, thumbing the button, trying to raise bass. Nothing but static. I told myself to get back in the truck, lock the doors, drive down to Pine Springs and wait out the rest of my shift somewhere with lights and coffee and other breathing people, but I didn't. The whistle came again, closer now. Not carried by the wind. Moving. And I, stupid, curious, prideful, answered it, not with a whistle of my own. Just a single word carried up into the black. Hello? Silence, thick and sudden as a closed door. Then, closer still, the whistle answered. I don't remember deciding to move. My feet just started, carrying me, flashlight forgotten in my hand, boots scuffing the rocky path as I left the truck behind. Toward the sound. Toward the cliffs. It's strange, what your mind does in the dark. Reason floats away. You stop thinking in words and start thinking in feelings. Cold, fear, alone. Something's ahead. Something's waiting. And you keep going, like a moth to flame. The ground underfoot grew steeper. Loose stone, thin soil, the kind of terrain they warned us about in training. Easy to lose your footing. Easy to vanish. I passed a signpost marking the trailhead for Devil's Hall, barely registered it through the fog creeping into my head. The whistle led me on dot at some point. I realized I wasn't alone on the trail. I couldn't see anyone, not really. Just a shape ahead. A man, maybe. Tall, shoulders sloped like a question mark. Moving slow, deliberate, just beyond the beam of my weak flashlight. I called out again. My own voice sounded small. He didn't turn, just kept walking, whistling dot up, and up we went, into rock that gleamed like old bones under the moon. I felt it then, not fear, not exactly. Something colder, recognition, like my bones already knew this story, already knew how it ended. I should have turned back. I should have run, but DIDN single quotes T dot at the crest of the rise, the figure stopped. Ahead, the land fell away into blackness, cliffs sharp as knives, the void beneath. He stood there, outlined against the stars, head cocked like he was listening. Then he turned. I don't know what I expected. A face, maybe. Eyes. Something I could describe later in the report I'd never write. But there was nothing. Just the hint of a man-shaped shadow, mouth open in an O of song, and from it, the whistle rising once more. He stepped forward, dot off the edge, dot gone, dot silence rushed in to fill the space where he'd been. I stood there too long. Long enough to feel the cold crawl into my teeth. Long enough to hear something behind me. Footsteps, slow and scraping, coming up the path I'd climbed alone. I turned, flashlight shaking in my grip. Nothing there. Nothing I could see, but the whistle came again. Right behind me this time. Ran. Stumbled half-blind down the rocks, tearing open my palms, splitting my knee on shale. Didn't stop until I saw the dim halo of headlights through the trees. My truck, right where I'd left it. Engine still warm. Radio still dead. I didn't go back up there, not that night. Not ever. They say the cliffs claim people now and then. A slip, a fall, a body broken where no one can reach. Happens every year if you check the records. Rangers vanish too. Lone patrols, late at night. They find the truck. They don't find the man. I didn't quit. Not right away, but I learned to listen. Learned to keep my head down when the sun goes, to steer clear of Devil's Hall after dark. And when the new hires show up, bright-eyed and eyed, skeptical, I tell them the same thing the old-timers told me. If you hear whistling after dark, don't answer, because some nights the cliffs answer back. They say the Bastrop fires were the worst in Texas history. 34,000 acres gone in smoke. Hundreds of homes reduced to blackened skeletons. Lives lost, some counted, others maybe not. The pine forest around Bastrop still looks wounded. Even now, years later, charred trunks lean like drunks frozen in place, patches of brittle green clawing their way back from ruin. But under the surface, beneath the soil and between the trees, the fire never really left. Neither did the ones it took. People still camp there. They shouldn't, but they do. Not many, not often, and never for long. Sometimes it's out-of-towners who don't know better, chasing some rustic weekend adventure with their shiny new gear and neatly folded maps. Sometimes it's locals with more beer than sense. And sometimes it's people like me, people looking for something they don't quite have the words for. Some kind of answer. Some proof that what they heard wasn't just stories. That the things they saw in the corners of their eyes weren't tricks of light or drink. I pulled into Bastrop State Park late, the sun already a smear of red sinking behind the skeletal trees. The place looked empty. The ranger station was shuttered, the map on the notice board sun-faded and torn. A sign warned of fire danger in block letters, though the real danger here wasn't something you could stop with a hose. I picked a spot. Near the edge of one of the old burn zone's flat ground. blackened stumps like gravestones all around, and the cracked remains of a fire ring someone had abandoned years back. I didn't come here to sleep. I came to listen. They say the ghost campers show up in the fog. That's when the outlines appear tense, burned down to nothing but greasy shadows on the dirt. You'll hear them before you see them if you're unlucky. Whispering, soft and eager, crawling through the mist like smoke. We burned, they say, but we never left. People have found things here. Half-melted lanterns where no one's camped in decades. Blackened bones tangled up in nylon straps. Footprints circling their tents at night, barefoot and wrong toes. Pointing in, stories sure. But stories come from somewhere. I sat up by the useless fire pit, watching my breath fog the air. Cold, though it was late summer. Bastrop has a way of bending the seasons. Night came fast. The moon crawled out from behind clouds like something guilty trying to watch. I didn't light a fire. Didn't want to give them a reason to come closer. It started small. A crack of twigs. A scrape of something soft against bark. I told myself it was deer or wind. But the wind wasn't blowing, and deer don't whisper. The fog rolled in just past midnight. Not thick at first, but heavy enough to smother sound, to turn the trees into shadows with edges that bled into one another. My flashlight showed nothing but pale beams swallowed whole a few feet out, but when I turned it off, that's when I heard them proper. Voices, not loud, not angry, curious, almost polite. A woman's voice first, soft and close to my ear. Is it safe yet? A man's, rough with smoke. We waited. We stayed. A child's, whisper thin. Are you here to help us out? The fog thickened. Shapes took form in it tents. Rows of them. Some sagging, some sharp-edged, all half-real like reflections in dirty water. Burn marks around the bases, black circles creeping outwards like rot. And between them, people, if you could call them that. Faces too pale, eyes too wide, mouths slack and silent except for the words that kept leaking out of them like breath. Through cracked lips, one turned toward me. A woman, or what was left of one. Her hair was gone, scalp shiny and blistered. Teeth bared in something that wasn't quite a smile. You brought fire? She asked. Not accusing, hopeful. I didn't. Answer. I couldn't. They started to move then, not walking, drifting, closing the space between us like smoke curling toward dry wood. My flashlight flickered, then died. Figures pressed in closer, outlines shimmering where their skin should have been, burned black and red beneath the thin veil of fog. Clothes melted to flesh, fingers fused together. Eyes empty but watching, watching. We burned, the woman said again, nearer now, but we never left. We waited, the man echoed, close enough to touch. His breath smelled of ash. Help us out, the child whispered from somewhere low, behind me, beneath me. Beneath the ground, I stood, took a step back. Another. My boot sank into something soft. Not earth canvas, I looked down. The shape of a tent, charred flat, burned so clean it might have been painted there. The outline of a sleeping bag inside curled small and tight. A shape inside the sleeping bag, smaller still. I ran. No shame. In it, just raw fear, animal fast and silent through the fog. Back to the truck, keys shaking in my hand, engine roaring too loud in the dead hush of that place. Headlights tore holes in the mist but didn't show me the way. Didn't show me. The road out. Just trees. Just more fog. Just more burned tents, appearing where they hadn't been a minute before. I drove blind. Tires found gravel, then pavement, then highway. Didn't stop till I hit the lights of town, and even then, I kept the engine running. Didn't look in the mirror. Didn't listen for voices in the back seat. That was 2 weeks ago. I still smell. Smoke on my clothes. I still find ash beneath my fingernails no matter how hard I scrub. Some nights, when the fog creeps in over the hills, I hear them again, just beneath the hum of streetlights, waiting, whispering that we burned, but we never left. Nobody knew exactly when the stories started, but they'd been around long enough that even the kids in Mineral Wells heard them whispered on the school bus, passed down from older brothers or worn-out uncles who liked their whiskey more than their wages. They said there was something in the water out at the lake. Not just something in the loose, vague way people say there's something eerie about dark water, but something real. Something pale. Something with a face. The lake itself wasn't big compared to others in Texas, but it was deep in spots where it didn't look like it should be. The water turned from brown to black in less than a few feet from shore, and even on clear days it seemed to swallow light like a mouth swallowing teeth. On the surface, it looked peaceful enough, tree-lined edges, old wooden docks half rotted, out of existence, kids skipping stones when the weather turned forgiving. But under all that, down where the sun couldn't reach, there were things people didn't talk about unless they were drunk or feeling mean. They said fishermen had seen it first. A face under the water, smooth and white as if carved from wax, floating just beneath the surface like it was waiting to rise but never quite got around to it. No eyes, just empty holes where they should have been, and a mouth too wide and too thin, pressed tight like it was holding back words or hunger. And if you looked too long, if you stared down into that stillness long enough to catch your own reflection, looking back sometimes your face would smile without you meaning it to. A slow, thin smile, like the water was teaching you how. Most folks laughed it off. Local campfire nonsense. Mineral Wells had been full of ghosts since before anyone alive could remember. From the haunted hotel on the hill to the 6 springs bubbling up through the earth like bad dreams. Another lake spirit hardly seemed worth getting worked up about. But then people started disappearing, not many at first. A homeless man who liked to fish off the rocks vanished sometime in March, his tackle box left sitting neat beside an empty thermos. A teenager from Weatherford got drunk and wandered off during a party, never came home. The cops dredged the lake a few times and found nothing but old tires and beer bottles and the bones of fish too big to name. But the stories got louder. More people started saying they'd seen something. A shape in the water when there shouldn't have been one. Ripples with no source. A reflection grinning when no one was smiling. Will Harlan wasn't the type to believe in ghost stories. He was a practical man, worked maintenance at the state park, fixing broken lights and patching fences and hauling trash out of campsites left behind by careless people. But he'd heard enough talk to know when something wasn't just talk anymore. One afternoon, toward the end of July, he found himself standing on the dock at the far edge of the lake, the one they didn't let campers use anymore because it was half sunk and splintered with rot. The sun was out, hot enough to make his shirt cling and his throat burned for a cold beer, but the water below looked dark as old blood. No wind, no sound. Just that black surface stretched out under him like a sheet pulled tight over a body. He didn't know why he looked. Maybe curiosity, maybe something mean and buried rising up in him after too many lonely years. But he did. He leaned out over the warped wood, peered down past his boots into the stillness, and waited for his own face to show itself that it took longer than he thought it would. His reflection didn't come up easy, like the water had to think about it. When it did, it wasn't right. His eyes were too wide, too white. His mouth too thin. And there, behind the shape of his head, something pale moved beneath the surface like a hand sliding along glass. He didn't move. Couldn't. Just stood there, watching as the shape resolved itself into features. A face eyeless and slick, pale as drowned milk. Its mouth didn't open, but his did. Slow. Unwilling. Like strings pulled from below. He heard something then. Not words, not really. More like the idea of words pressing against his thoughts, wet and heavy and full of promises. Stay. He jerked back hard enough to make the dock shudder beneath him. His breath came fast and stupid, like he'd been running. The face below didn't follow. It just hovered, pale and silent, until the ripples swallowed it whole. He didn't tell anyone. Not at first. Who would believe him? A grown man seeing faces in the lake. But he didn't go near the water again, not even to fix the busted lamp, posts or haul out driftwood. He quit 2 weeks later without giving notice. Moved in with his sister in Stephenville and started going to church regular. Though even the preacher couldn't make him say why, others weren't so lucky. A father and son went missing that August, their boat found floating empty in a cove no deeper than a bathtub. A woman's dog vanished off the leash while she was walking it near the shoreline. A teenager drowned in water too shallow to swallow. A grown man, his mouth stretched wide in a grin no one could explain. People started staying away from the lake. The park got quieter. The fish stopped biting. By fall, the only ones left coming were the kinds who didn't mind silence, didn't mind staring too long into black water, didn't mind the thought of something watching back. They said you could see the face more often now near the edges, near the rocks, waiting. Some said it wasn't a ghost at all, not in the usual sense. Not something that had been alive once and wanted revenge. They said it was older than that. Something from before the springs turned bad, before the town was built, before people ever thought to name water like it needed naming. A thing that didn't care about bodies or reasons or prayers. A thing that wanted only faces, reflections, mouths learning to smile wrong. And sometimes late at night, when the wind dies and the world turns so still you can hear your own blood move, those who look out at lake mineral wells say they see more than one face beneath the surface. 12, 100, all pale, all waiting, all smiling in the dark. It's the kind of story you don't tell people unless it's late, unless it's dark, unless everyone's had enough to drink or is tired enough to listen. The kind of story you don't bring up during daylight because daylight makes it sound ridiculous, and there's a difference between stupid campfire tales and the things that claw at the edges of your memory long after you're home, long after you've told yourself it was nothing. Garner State Park in the off-season is quiet in the way. Old cemeteries are quiet. A kind of hush that feels forced, unnatural. In summer, it's full of families, the sounds of kids screaming. Downriver slides, radios playing Tejano from the backs of pickup trucks, the smell of barbecue smoke clinging to everything. But come October, November, it empties out. The cold creeps in, the nights stretch longer, and the Frio River gets its name back. Cold, frigid, still. I wasn't there for ghost stories, not at first. Me and a buddy of mine, Tommy, we were just looking for a weekend out from San Antonio. A break from the routine. We had this dumb idea to hike the trails at night, something about seeing the stars better without city light drowning them out. We weren't drunk, I'll make that clear. Not even a little high. We packed light, had headlamps, backup flashlights, even brought a little emergency radio. We weren't amateurs. Tommy's ex was a park ranger, so he knew the area better than fatter than most. We'd done this before, but not here. Not Garner. We started up Old Baldy Trail around 9 p.m. Figured we'd loop around toward Crystal Cave, then cut down toward the river trails. Easy path. Maybe 3-4 miles round trip. We didn't tell anyone where we were going. Dumb, I know, but that's how sure we were of ourselves. The moon was a sliver, not enough light to see much by, and even with the lamps on, the limestone underfoot seemed to swallow the glow. The trees here don't move like trees should. They bend weird in the wind, twist like they're trying to get somewhere. There's a quiet hum to the place you only notice when you've stopped talking. Like the ground itself is breathing through the rocks. We made it up to the overlook without anything strange happening. Took some pictures of the dark horizon, the scattered lights of Konkan miles off looking like they belonged to another world. Entirely. Then Tommy mentioned something about the river fog. How sometimes it rolls in sudden, thick as cotton, and how easy it'd be to get turned around. We started back down. Somewhere between the descent and the river trail, my headlamp flickered out. Just gone, like a switch flipped in the back of my skull. Tommy laughed, handed me his spare, and we kept moving. I thought nothing of it. Batteries died, but then his went too. Then my backup flashlight. One after another, like dominoes falling in the dark. We weren't scared yet. Frustrated, sure, but not scared. Not until we realized the dark wasn't normal, you get used to. A certain kind of dark in the woods. This wasn't it. This wasn't shadows and starlight. This was thick, pressing, absolute. I could barely make out the outline of Tommy standing 3 feet from me. Couldn't see my hand in front of my face. No glow from the watch, no light from the phone, nothing. Like we'd stepped off the trail and into a cave without noticing, and then we heard it, gravel shifting under slow, deliberate steps. Down by the river, not an animal. Animals scurry. They dart, they don't walk. This was human pace, heavy, measured. Coming closer, we didn't speak. I know that sounds strange, but we didn't even look at each other. Some instinct deeper than reason told us not to move, not to make a sound. Just listen. Through the black, a soft yellow light bloomed. Weak at first, barely more than a firefly glow. Then it steadied, grew, a lantern. Old style, the kind with a glass globe and a brass handle. Carried by a figure moving up from the riverbank. She wore something like a dress, long and pale, floating a little behind her steps as if it didn't want to touch the dirt. No sound from the fabric, no rustle of grass. Just the soft crunch of her boots on the stone. Her face was turned down, hidden beneath long black hair that hung straight as curtains. The lantern swung gently in her hand. Tommy whispered my name, just a breath, barely more than a thought escaping his throat. But she heard it. Her head turned, slowly, unnaturally slow, like an owl swiveling too far. I didn't see a face, not really. Just a smear of gray where features should have been, 2 pits where eyes belonged. Blacker than the dark around us. Our phones died in our pockets. I know because I felt mine vibrate once like a dying gasp, then go cold and lifeless. The lantern light flared brighter through long twisted shadows against the rocks. And with it came this smell, wet earth, mold, something old and rotting beneath river water. My mouth filled with it. My eyes burned. She took another step toward us. That's when Tommy broke. Bolted sideways into the brush, crashing blind. Through mesquite and cedar. I wanted to follow, but my legs wouldn't move. My body felt pinned, like the dark itself held me in place. I couldn't scream. Couldn't speak. I watched her approach, lantern swinging, those empty sockets fixed on me like hooks sunk deep. The light touched my feet. My legs, climbed me inch by inch like cold water rising. And then she smiled. Not with her mouth. I don't think she had one. With the space where her face should have been. A crack split open sideways, revealing nothing inside. Just void. Endless. Something cold wrapped around my wrist. I looked down. Her hand. Thin, skeletal fingers curling through the dark. Pulling. And then I ran. I don't remember how. 1 second. She was there, dragging me down, and the next I was stumbling through the trees, breath tearing my throat raw. I didn't stop until I hit the campsite. Didn't stop even then, just collapsed into the dirt like I'd outrun death itself. Tommy never made it back. They searched for 3 days. Dogs, rangers, volunteers. Found his pack snagged in a tree downriver, torn open like something with claws. Had rifled through it. Found footprints that led down into the water, none that came out. They asked me what happened. I told them he slipped, got lost. I didn't mention the lantern, didn't mention the woman, but sometimes at night, when the fog creeps in and the air smells of wet stone and rot, I see a light moving slow between the trees. Swinging back and forth, searching. I keep my head down. I don't speak. I don't breathe, because if she looks at you, there's no coming back. Caprock Canyons doesn't look like the sort of place where something evil would live. Not at first glance anyway. It's beautiful if you catch it at sunset. The cliffs bleed red and orange and cast long shadows that stretch across the brittle scrubland like skeletal fingers. But locals know better. They don't go there after dark. Even the ones who laugh it off over beer and whiskey in town lock their doors tighter when the wind starts up. It's not the howling itself that scares people. It's what you sometimes hear underneath it. Nobody warns tourists outright. They let the brochures talk about bison and prairie dogs and hiking trails and the fading bones of ancient seabeds. They let people wander in, same way they let people wander out, if they're lucky. If they're not, they're just gone. Or sometimes they come back different. I wasn't much for ghost stories. Never have been. I've lived in the Panhandle my whole life, and I thought I'd heard it all. Thought maybe the stories about Caprock were the same kind of nonsense as the ones about rattlesnakes, big enough to swallow coyotes or thunderstorms bringing devils on the wind. But then my brother Jacob disappeared out there last July. The sheriff's office said he probably fell. Said he probably got lost and dehydrated and wandered until heatstroke finished the job. Happens every summer, they said, like it was nothing. Except Jacob wasn't stupid. He'd hiked that canyon since we were kids. He knew every trail, every drop-off, every patch of shade. He'd gone out that day alone, like always, just to clear his head. His girlfriend said they'd fought the night before, something about money, and he needed to walk it off. He left before dawn and never came back. They found his truck parked neat at the ranger station, windows cracked to keep the heat from shattering the glass. Found his water bottle in the cab full. Found his phone sitting on the passenger seat. Like he meant to grab it, but forgot. They sent search parties for 2 weeks. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers combing every inch of scrub and rock. Nothing. Not a shoe print. Not a scrap of fabric. Not a goddamn thing. Well, not exactly nothing. One of the volunteers, an old ranch hand named Eddie, said he heard something. Out there. Not voices exactly. More like wind trying to sound like voices. Screaming, crying, begging. Said it nearly drove him mad. Said he got turned around and might have wandered off a cliff if one of the other searchers hadn't grabbed him by the shoulder and snapped him out of it. After that, Eddie wouldn't go back. Wouldn't even look toward the canyons when he drove past. Said he could still hear it sometimes, on bad nights, even with his window shut tight and the TV on loud. I didn't believe him. Not really. Not then, but grief makes people stupid. Makes them reckless. A month after the search ended, I packed a bag, left a note for my wife that just said, "I have to try," and drove out there myself. I parked in the same spot Jacob had. Sat in his truck for a long time, staring at his phone on the seat like it might tell me something. It didn't. I started walking around noon. Too hot for it, but I didn't care. Figured if something bad had taken him, daylight wouldn't stop it. I stuck to the same trail he always used. The cliffs loomed up on either side like teeth, red and jagged against the washed-out sky. Wind hissed through the rocks, pushing little whirlwinds of dust ahead of me. It sounded almost like breathing. I walked for hours. Called his name until my throat ached. Nothing answered. Not even an echo. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. No birds, no insects, no nothing. Just the wind out about 5 miles in, I found. Something. Not him. Not even bones. Just a place where the trail ended at a sheer drop, maybe 100 feet straight down into a dry riverbed. The rock at the edge was wrong. Blackened like it had been burned, but there wasn't a mark of fire anywhere else. The ground smelled sour, like old meat left out in the sun. I stood there too long. Long enough for the shadows to shift. Long enough for the wind to pick up. That's when I heard it. Not the wind. Not exactly. Not any more voices. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Twisting up out of the canyon like smoke, thin and high and desperate. Help me. Please, God. Run over and over, layered so thick I couldn't tell one from another. Men, women, kids. Some just screaming, raw and hopeless. Some laughing like something out of a nightmare. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn around and sprint back to the truck and never look at this place again. But I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't work. My feet felt nailed to the rock. Then I heard his voice. Jacob got close, right behind me. He said my name. Said it soft, like he didn't want to scare me. Like he was afraid. I turned. He was standing about 20 feet back on the trail. Same jeans and boots he wore the day he left. Same gray t-shirt with the faded Pantera logo. Only he wasn't. Right. His skin was too pale. His eyes were wrong. Black, empty, like burned out holes. His mouth moved, but his voice wasn't coming from him. It was coming from everywhere, all around, tangled up in the screaming wind. Run, he said. You have to run. I couldn't. I wanted to, but I couldn't. Something held me there. Something cold and ancient and patient. I could feel it watching. I could feel it waiting. Jacob stepped closer. His face twisted like it hurt to move. His hands shook. His fingers bent wrong, like they'd been broken and healed. Crook. Run. He said again, and finally, I did. I don't remember how I got back to the truck. I don't remember the drive home. I came through the door filthy and bleeding from places I couldn't explain, and my wife cried like she thought I'd been dead. Maybe I had been, for a little while. I still wake up sometimes with dirt under. My nails and cactus spines in my skin. I still hear him too. Not just at night. In the wind, in the pipes, in the silence between breaths. Run, but it's too late. I brought something back with me. I don't know what it is, but it's here now. In the walls, in the dark corners, in the quiet when the wind dies down. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the mirror and my eyes aren't mine. Sometimes, when the wind gets just right, I scream, and the wind screams back. The trouble started about 3 miles in, right around the time the sun dropped behind the hills and left nothing but a sickly red smear bleeding out over the bluffs. Matt wasn't the type to spook easily. He'd grown up running deer trails through the hill country since he was a kid, camped alone plenty of times with nothing but a bedroll and a .22 for snakes. But there was something different about Colorado Bend, something the locals liked to keep to themselves, the same way they kept their eyes low when strangers asked for directions near dusk. It had been Melissa's idea to hike it after dark. Trail. Magic, she called it. Some TikTok trend, or maybe just the latest excuse to make content. You hike it at night, and weird stuff happens. People get turned around, hear footsteps behind them. They say it's the river spirits. She'd laughed when she said it, but even then, standing in the parking lot with her phone light up and recording, there'd been something tight around her mouth, something unsure. They weren't drunk. They weren't stoned. Just a couple of friends bored and looking for a scare. First couple of miles were fine. A little eerie, sure, with the wind running soft through the cedars and the river black as oil beside them. Crickets loud enough to fill the spaces between their words. That skimming low. All the usual noises of a Texas night, nothing to write home about. The trouble began when Matt noticed the sign. A small, weather-faded plank nailed to a post, half swallowed by vines. Trail continues this way. Melissa snapped a photo of it, made. Some joke about step by step, baby, and they kept walking. 15 minutes later, they passed the sign again. Same vines curling over the wood. Same blistered paint peeling off in ragged strips. You notice that? Matt said. Notice what? That sign. Melissa turned, squinting. No way. We've been moving forward. But there it was. Same bend in the trail. Same scatter of rocks. Even the same fallen limb curled like a snake across the path. She brushed it off. These trails all look the same. That's the trick of it. It's just in your head. But 20 minutes after that, there it was again. Same sign, same fucking limb. Same sound behind them, too, slow, careful footsteps. Pacing just a few yards back, never gaining, never falling behind. They stopped walking. The footsteps stopped too. Matt swung his light behind them. Nothing but trees, shifting shadows, the endless hush of leaves moving against one another. You hear it too, right? He said. Melissa didn't answer. They kept going faster now, because the dark was starting to feel like it pressed closer with every step, like something unseen was drawing them forward, coiling around them with quiet patience. Melissa's phone light flickered and went out. Battery's dead, she said, but her voice sounded wrong, too calm, too forced, like she was already bargaining with herself not to panic. Matt's light stayed steady, but it didn't help much. The beam seemed to shrink, swallowed up, by trees that pressed tighter with every loop. And it was a loop. They both knew it now, though neither of them wanted to say it out loud. They were walking in a goddamn circle. How long had they been out here? 40 minutes? An hour? More? Time felt slippery. The footsteps behind them stayed steady. Sometimes they shifted off the path, crunching softly through dead leaves. Sometimes they seemed to draw nearer, close enough that Matt half expected to feel breath on the back of his neck. Could be an animal, Melissa said. No animal follows you like that. Another bend. Another sign. Trail continues this way. Melissa cursed and threw a rock at it. The sound it made when it hit was wrong. Somehow, not the hollow thump of wood, but something deeper, wetter, like a fist landing on meat. They walked faster. Then slower. Tried cutting through the brush at one point, stepping off the worn path and forcing their way through brambles and clawing branches. But after 10 minutes, they broke back onto the trail, onto the same trail, with the same sign. Leering at them through the dark. Matt felt at first a kind of sinking in his gut, like the earth under his boots wasn't solid anymore. Like every step took them deeper into something hungry and patient. Melissa's breathing grew ragged. I don't like this, Matt. I want out. I want out right now. He didn't have an answer for her. The sounds behind them grew bolder. Not just footsteps now, but breathing. Slow, heavy. A wet sort of exhale, like lungs full of water forcing air through. They tried running then. Didn't matter. The loop snapped back around on them like a noose. Trail continues this way. The sign looked different this time. The letters seemed fresher somehow, gleaming faintly as if wet with something dark and thick. Melissa grabbed Matt's arm. Please, please tell me this is a prank. He shook his head. I want you to stop talking now. So they walked. What else was there to do? They walked and the footsteps behind them kept pace. And the dark thickened until even their own bodies felt like strangers to them. Hands and feet moving without permission, breath coming from somewhere far away. At some point Melissa stopped. Matt didn't notice at first. He just kept moving, too focused on putting one foot in front of the other. When he finally realized she wasn't beside him, he turned and she was gone. No footsteps ahead. No footsteps behind. Just silence. He called her name, once, twice. The third time something answered. Not a voice. Not words. Just that same ragged breathing, closer now, just behind his ear. He ran then. Didn't care where. Didn't care how. Just ran until his legs burned and his chest clawed for air. The sign waited for him, steady as a gravestone. Trail continues. This way. Melissa stood beneath it. At least, something wearing her shape did. Her face looked wrong. Pale and loose, like it had been stitched back on by trembling hands. Her mouth hung open too wide, her teeth black and wet, and her eyes watched him with something like hunger and something like patience. She raised one hand, slow as the tide, and pointed, back the way he'd come. Footsteps started again. He didn't scream. He walked out and the trail continued. They always said Dinosaur Valley had its share of strange stories. Rangers like to tell them around campfires to keep city folks from wandering too far at night. But the one that stuck with me, the one I can't shake no matter how long it's been, is the story about the footsteps. Not because of the story itself, but because I heard them myself. And I know what followed me through those woods wasn't any coyote or bobcat. I'd taken some time off work that summer to clear my head. A bad breakup, too many hours spent locked behind a computer screen, and this gnawing sense that life was slipping past while I wasted it all on meaningless things. So I packed up my tent, drove out to Glen Rose, and figured I'd spend a few days hiking trails, listening to the river, and maybe finding some old piece of myself I'd lost somewhere. Along the way, the first day was exactly what I needed. Quiet trails winding between limestone cliffs and sun-baked fossil beds. The river was low, trickling slow beneath the rock shelves, and the cicadas buzzed like tiny motors in the heat. I hardly saw anyone else after I left the main trail, just a couple families splashing near the tracks and one old man fishing with a line tied to a branch. I pitched my tent at one of the primitive sites far out near the edge of the woods where the trails get thin and overgrown. No cell service. Number. Chatter. Just me and the land. That first night, I slept light. The woods never really go quiet not out there. Something's always moving, breathing, living. Armadillos rustled through the brush. Owls called out now and then. Coyotes howled in the distance. It was a peaceful noise, though. The kind of wild that makes you feel small, but safe somehow. Like you're being watched by something older and bigger than you, but not bothered enough to harm you. The second night was different. I'd hiked hard all day. Downriver where the trails fade into almost nothing and the rocks rise up sharp and cracked like teeth out of the dirt. I'd seen strange prints out there. Deep imprints in the dry river mud, big as dinner plates, toes long and spread. I told myself it was just erosion or leftover casts from some tourist's prank. Still, I didn't linger. By the time I got back to camp, dusk was crawling in slow. I cooked dinner over my little stove, drank a beer, watched the sky bleed out. From orange to violet to black. I should have packed up and left then. Something in the air felt off. Like the pressure dropped, though no storm was coming. Even the bugs went quiet. I crawled into my tent just past 10. Zipped the flap shut, turned off my lantern, and lay there listening to nothing but my own breathing for a while. Maybe an hour. Passed. Maybe less. I started drifting off. That's when I heard it. Heavy footsteps. Not close. Not right away. Out beyond the trees at first. Slow. Deliberate. Something big. Heavier than a man. Each step pressed into the earth with this soft thud. Not stomping. Not crashing, but careful somehow. Like it was testing the ground. I held my breath and waited. Told myself it was a hog rooting through the underbrush. or a cow strayed from some fence line. But the steps circled wide, looping closer each time. Not crashing through leaves walking. In a pattern. When it got close enough that I could feel the vibration through the ground, I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out with my flashlight. I didn't see anything. Not at first, then I noticed the grass about 15 feet out. The grass bent. Not like it was being blown by wind. Bent down, flattened, one patch at a time as something heavy stepped across it. Step after step, moving in a slow circle around my tent. I shined the light straight at it. Nothing there. Just that crushed path forming as if something invisible pressed it down. I stayed frozen, breath locked in my throat. The footsteps circled again, closer now, 10 feet. Then 8. Then 5. Whatever it was, it stopped right behind my tent. I heard breathing low, steady, huge, not human. Not animal, not in any way I've ever known. The air got colder. I could see my breath even though the night was warm as bathwater. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But what good would it do? I couldn't see it. I couldn't fight it. Then it leaned against the tent. Not hard, just enough to press the fabric in like a hand, except bigger. Wider. The shape it made wasn't right. Too long, too thin. I could feel heat coming off it, even through the nylon. Heat and a smell like wet stone and blood left out in the sun. It stayed there for maybe a minute. Or an hour. I lost all sense of time. Then it moved, slowly, deliberately. I heard it step away. The grass bent behind it, further and further, until the sound faded into the trees and the night grew still again. I didn't sleep after that. Didn't even move. I sat there with the flashlight in my lap until dawn bled through the trees like a mercy I didn't deserve. When I finally stepped out, the path was still there. Crushed grass. Big, deliberate strides, circling my tent in perfect loops. Before wandering off into the woods, I packed up fast. Left without breakfast. Didn't even bother rolling the tent, I just stuffed it in the trunk and drove until the park gates were in my rear view. Later, talking to a ranger on my way out, I mentioned it. Not the whole story, just the footsteps, the circles, the grass. He gave me this look like he'd heard it before, like he'd seen it before. Lot of folks hear things at night out there, he said. Sometimes see 'em too. Best not to go looking. Things that walk without being seen, they don't like being noticed. I haven't been back to Dinosaur Valley. Not since but sometimes when I camp alone, no matter how far from Texas I am, I hear footsteps circling the tent. Slow, heavy, deliberate. And when I shine my light out, the grass bends. They say if you swim too close to the falls at McKinney, you'll feel it first before you ever see it. A kind of pressure, like the weight of unseen eyes pushing down on you from below. Locals talk about it in hushed voices at barbecues. Kids dare each other to touch the rocks beneath the cascade. And more than one late-night fisherman has packed up early with his skin crawling for reasons he couldn't explain. But nobody really talks about it in a way that sounds serious. Not until it happens to you. It was a blistering hot July the first time I felt it. I'd gone to the falls with my cousin Jeremy and a few of his friends. We weren't kids anymore, 24, 25, but that's the thing about Texas heat. It doesn't care how grown you think you are. When it climbs high enough, grown men will strip down to their shorts and dive into river water like schoolboys. That's what we did. Parked under the sun-baked oaks, hiked down with coolers and towels, set up camp on a slab of limestone smoothed over centuries by the slow grinding work of water. The falls weren't much, just a curtain of water slapping down over a lip of rock into a wide green pool. Not Niagara by any means, but pretty. Peaceful, at least. That's how it seemed at first. I remember swimming under the spray, letting It'd drum against my shoulders, trying to push myself down into the current that churned beneath it. The water got cold fast down there. Sharp cold. My ears popped and my chest tightened the deeper I went until I felt my hand brush something beneath the surface. Not rock. Not moss, something softer. Something that gave a little beneath my touch and then recoiled. I shot back up fast, coughing. River water, wiping my face, looking for Jeremy or one of the others to laugh it off with. But none of them were close. They'd wandered downriver, beers in hand, leaving me alone beneath the falls. I didn't tell them what I thought I'd felt. Didn't say a word. Not then. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing pale shapes. Beneath the water. Hands, maybe. Fingers trailing just beneath the rippling surface. It got under my skin, dug in deep, like a splinter you can't quite work free. I went back the next day alone. Stupid, maybe. But I needed to see it again, needed to prove to myself there was nothing there but weeds and shadows and my own overactive imagination. I waited until the families had cleared out, until the sun hung low and orange over the trees. The water looked different in that light, thicker, like it held secrets. I eased in slow, feeling the way the cold wrapped itself around my legs, climbing higher with each step. Beneath the falls, the water churned in lazy circles, pulling at me. I let it drag me down to where the rocks lay slick with algae, and the silt swirled like smoke in the dim light. That's when I saw a dot, not clearly, not all at once. Just the impression of something pale slipping back into the deeper dark, the suggestion of fingers trailing against the stone before vanishing again. My chest seized up. I kicked hard, drove myself back to the surface, gasping. The falls roared. On, indifferent. I climbed out shaking, wrapped myself in a towel, and told myself I'd imagined it. Except I hadn't. A week later, someone drowned, a boy. 16, maybe 17. His friends said he'd gone under near the falls and never come back up. They dragged the pool for hours, pulled his body up bloated and blue from where it had wedged beneath a shelf of rock. His face was torn, scratched deep, like he'd fought something down there. But the sheriff's office blamed rocks and panic. Said the river didn't need help killing you. Jeremy called me after he heard, asked if I'd gone back since. I told him no. Lied through my teeth. Didn't tell him how I'd started driving out there after dark, parking by the locked gate and walking down alone with nothing but a flashlight and a six-pack for courage. Didn't tell him how I'd started seeing things in the water, not shapes anymore, not just impressions, but eyes. Pale and open and watching from just beneath the surface. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, until the night I saw the hand out it rose slow, gripping the edge of the rock beneath the falls. Pale skin stretched thin over bone, fingers too. Long, too narrow, curling like dead vines around the stone. I couldn't see the rest of it. Just the hand, pulling itself closer to the air, then sliding back beneath with a kind of awful patience. Like it knew I was there. Like it wanted me to know. I stopped going after that. Tried to anyway. But it got into my head, made itself at home. I started dreaming of it. Water pouring into my mouth, my lungs filling up while those hands pulled me down. Down to where the light couldn't follow. Woke up choking, sheets soaked with sweat, feeling like I'd left part of myself behind down there. Word spread. More drownings. Not many, not often, but enough. All the same place. Always beneath the falls. They put up warning signs. No swimming. Dangerous currents. But people don't listen. Not when it's hot, not when the water calls. Last I heard, some college kid vanished. His girlfriend said she saw something pulling him down, swore she saw fingers wrapped around his ankle before he disappeared. They said she was in shock. Said she made it up to make sense of what didn't, but I know better. I think it's always been there, waiting, Some nights I drive out anyway. Park beneath the moon and listen to the water working at the rocks like teeth on bone. Sometimes I think I see it. Just for a moment, a face beneath the surface, pale and watchful, drifting. Beneath the skin of the river like something half-born. I wonder what it's waiting for. I wonder how long before it tires of waiting. There's something wrong with Mustang Island. Always has been, if you ask the people who've lived there long enough to notice the things most folks choose to ignore. Not the tourists, not the weekenders from Corpus Christi who come down for. The beach and the sun and the cheap beer. They don't stay long enough to understand it. But if you were born there, if you stayed through the gray winters and the dead slow seasons when the motels go quiet and the ocean turns cold and mean, then you've heard the stories. Maybe you've seen it for yourself, standing out there, on the shoreline just before dawn. They call it the dead horse, because what else would you call a thing like that? Folks say it walks alone, bleeding from wounds so old they've gone black at the edges. Its ribs showing through stretched and rotted hide like driftwood picked clean by gulls. They say its eyes aren't really eyes at all, just black holes. Where something used to be. I never believed any of it. Not really. Not until the year my brother died. Wesley was 2 years older than me and too stubborn to leave Mustang Island, even though there wasn't a damn thing keeping him there except for bad decisions and worse luck. He worked odd jobs, shrimp boats. Mostly, sometimes construction when there was work to be had, which wasn't often. He drank too much, slept too little, and drove his beat-up Chevy like he was trying to outrun something no one else could see. When they pulled him out of the Gulf, they said it looked like he'd been in the water longer than he really had. Skin bloated and torn, barnacles already starting to bloom along his arms like some kind of disease. They said drowning does strange things to a body, but it wasn't drowning that killed Wesley. The night he disappeared, he'd been drinking at Murphy's, same as always. Got in a fight, same as always. Except this time, after they threw him out, he didn't drive home. He walked down to the beach instead, according to the bartender, muttering something about the horse, about settling old debts. No one thought much of it then. Drunks say all kinds of shit. 3 days later, his body washed up near the jetty. That's when I started paying attention. They buried him in the little cemetery off Highway 361, the one where the headstones lean, like drunks themselves, and after that, I started walking the beach most mornings, watching. I told myself it was for closure, for answers. Truth was, I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe I just wanted to feel close to him, stupid as that sounds. Maybe I wanted to punish myself for leaving in the first place, for not being there to drag him out of that ocean. It was early one morning, late February, cold enough the sand bit through my shoes and the wind off the water felt like needles in my throat. The sky was that dead gray just before sunrise when everything looks washed out and hollow. I'd been walking for maybe an hour, head down, lost in my own useless thoughts, when I saw a dot first, just the shape of it, standing still about 20 yards ahead of me, silhouetted against the pale surf. A horse, alone, wrong, even from a distance. I could tell something wasn't right. The legs too thin, the head hanging too low, the skin clinging in patches like wet paper to bone, and those eyes. Black, empty pits staring straight out at the horizon like it was waiting for something to come crawling up out of the water. I stopped. The wind died all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. No sound but the slow, heavy crash of the tide. It didn't move. I took a step forward, another. That's when I noticed the blood. It wasn't fresh, too dark for that. More like oil smeared across the pale hide, dripping slow and steady from wounds that should have killed it 100 times over. Deep tears along the flanks, raw holes in the chest, something leaking black and foul from beneath the ribs. And yet it stood, watching. I don't know how long I stood there staring back. Long enough for the sky to start bleeding pink behind the clouds. Long enough to realize I wasn't alone anymore. There were footprints beside me in the sand. Bare feet. Too big to be mine. Too wide and heavy, like something dragged through the earth rather than walked. They led from the dunes down to where I stood, and then past me toward the horse. Except no one had passed me. I would have seen. I would have heard that the horse moved, one step. Slow, deliberate, toward the water dot and behind it, rising up from the surf like a shadow peeling itself off the surface of the world. Something else that not a man, though at first glance. It might have seemed like one, tall, thin, wrapped in what looked like blackened seaweed and salt-stained rags. No face that I could see, just a hollow where the mouth ought to be, gaping wide enough I thought I could hear the ocean pouring through it. The thing moved with the same slow, broken gait as the horse, following in its path, bleeding the same. Thick black rot into the sand. They disappeared together into the mist, walking east, always east. Toward whatever waits beyond the edge of things. I turned and ran. Don't walk the beach anymore. Locals say the dead horse comes back every year, always around the same time, always just before dawn. Some say it's looking for something. Some say it's a curse tied to old sins and older blood. There's talk about shipwrecks, about smugglers and slavers and men drowned in chains. About things buried beneath the sand that never should have been disturbed. Me. I think it's simpler than that. Some things die wrong. And sometimes, if the wound's deep enough, if the hate's strong enough, they don't stay dead. They just keep walking. And if you're out there to see them, if you're stupid enough to follow, well, they say drowning does strange things to a body, but stranger things still wait beneath the tide. They say if you sit quietly long enough in Dangerfield State Park, the trees will start to whisper. Not the way normal trees do when the wind moves through them. No, this is different. It's slower, deeper, like the bones of the earth are, grinding beneath you. Some folks say it's just the wind pushing through the pines and the sweetgums, brushing across the lake, stirring up the leaves in the understory. But those folks have never been out there alone after dark. Not really. Alone, not really listening. I thought I understood quiet places before I came to Dangerfield. I grew up out in the sticks, farther east from there, past Jefferson, where the woods get so thick you can barely see the sky half the time. I used to think I'd heard every sound the woods could make, but those woods never spoke to me the way these did. I came to Dangerfield State Park in late October, just before the first frost, chasing something I didn't really have words for back then. I told people it was about getting away, resetting, finding some peace. The truth was uglier. My wife had been gone almost 2 years by then. Suicide, if you want to put a name to it. Pills, a note left out neat on the counter like a receipt, for something she'd bought and couldn't return. I blamed myself, of course. You always do. I carried it with me like a rotted tooth in my chest that I couldn't pull out. I couldn't sleep right, couldn't eat, couldn't laugh at things. That used to make me laugh. The world had gone thin around the edges, and I thought maybe I'd go sit under some trees and listen to the wind and try to remember how to feel human again. The park was half empty, most of the summer crowd long gone. Just retirees in there. RVs and the odd out-of-towner like me. I rented a little screened-in shelter near the lake. Not quite camping, not quite a cabin. Perfect for a man who couldn't decide if he wanted to be around people or not. The first night, nothing happened. I walked the trails until sunset, watched the light bleed out across the tops of the trees, turned in early with a book I didn't really read. The only sounds were the frogs and the crickets and something big splashing out on the lake. I told myself it was a fish, maybe a gator. I slept better than I had in months. The second night, I stayed out later. I walked down past the picnic area, past the boat ramp, into the trees where the trail curls along the edge of the water. It was getting cold by then. I could see my breath in the beam of my flashlight, curling like smoke. The woods were quiet. Too quiet, like the animals were holding their breath. I sat on a big rock near the water and just listened. That's when I heard it at first. I thought it was wind again, pushing high through the treetops. But there was no wind. Not a single leaf moved. The air hung still and heavy, smelling of wet earth and old moss. The sound came low, like voices far off in another room. Not words exactly, not any words I knew, but shaped like words with the rise and fall of speech. It scraped against my brain in a way that made my teeth ache. My skin crawled. I shone my flashlight into the trees, but of course there was nothing there. Just the pines standing tall and black against the sky, their bark rough as dead hands. Told myself it was imagination, grief, exhaustion, stress. I left the rock, went back to my shelter, locked the screen door like that was going to keep out whatever might be moving between the trunks of those trees. The next day, I asked the ranger about it, just offhand, like I wasn't really asking. You ever hear things out there at night? I said. He gave me a look over the rim of his coffee cup, one of those long, measuring looks people give when they're deciding how much truth you deserve. I don't camp down by the lake, he said finally. Not after dark. Why? He shrugged, but it wasn't casual. Old stories, old things. You stay long enough, you'll hear 'em. Some folks say it's just the trees settling, sap moving, that kind of thing. Others say there's something buried out there. Something that ain't forgotten how to speak. I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. He didn't. You'll be fine, he said. Just don't go too far in. Stay where you can see the water. But that night, I didn't stay by the water. I told myself I wasn't scared, that I just wanted to see for myself, hear for myself, prove to myself there was nothing out there but wind and my own broken thoughts. I followed the trail deeper into the woods, past where it starts to narrow, and the trees grow thick enough to block the stars. I turned off my flashlight after a while. The moon was full and bright enough to see by, painting everything silver and blue. The trees leaned in close over the path like they were listening, and then they started to whisper. This time it wasn't far off or faint. It was all around me, like breath on my neck. Still not words, not really, but something deeper. Shapes of sounds that hooked into my gut and twisted. I could feel it moving under my feet, pulling at me, calling. I pressed my hand to a tree without thinking, and it felt warm beneath the bark, like something alive was pulsing just under the surface. It shivered under my palm, and the whispering grew louder. They weren't speaking to me. Not directly. They were speaking to each other, slow and careful, like they were deciding. Like they were remembering how to speak human. I ran. I'm not ashamed to say it. I ran blind through the trees, branches slapping at my face, tearing at my clothes. I could hear them laughing, or maybe crying. It was hard to tell. The sounds chased me through the dark, growing sharper, closer. I hit the trail by luck more than anything else, followed it back by the glint of moonlight on gravel, back to my little shelter with its thin walls and its screen door. I didn't sleep. I sat up with my back to the wall, listening as the whispering crept closer, pressed up against the screens like fingers made of breath. Just before dawn, it stopped, just like that. Like whatever it was had finally lost interest, or given up, or gone deeper. I left the next day. Packed up before the sun was fully up, drove out past the gates without looking back. I don't know what I heard out there. I don't want to know, but I'll tell you this. If you go to Dangerfield State Park and you sit very still, very quiet, you'll hear them. The trees. Talking in voices older than any language we remember. Asking questions no one alive knows how to answer. waiting for someone foolish enough to try. There's something about a Texas lake after midnight that pulls at a man's instincts, same as a dark road or an empty house with a door swinging open in a storm. Lake Tawa County especially. Folks fish there because the catfish run thick and big, and it's easy to believe a body could disappear beneath all that water without much trouble. The banks are mostly empty after dark. Too many stories. Too much silence between the wind and the trees. But fishermen are a stubborn breed, and men will convince themselves of any lie if it lets them keep their pole in the water a little longer. On this particular night, Bobby Stiles and Daryl McKee were set up on the east shore, down near where the trees get sickly thin and the mud turns black with rot. They'd brought a cooler full of beer, some frozen chicken livers, and enough cigarettes to choke a priest. They weren't bad men, just tired, worn down by hard weeks laying drywall and fixing other people's broken houses. Fishing at night gave them a reason not to go home to wives who didn't smile much anymore. Out there by the water, with nothing but moonlight and the hollow glug of a bobber shifting in the dark, they could pretend a little longer that life was still slow and simple. It was near 1 a.m. when Bobby noticed it. Just a shape at first. Down the shoreline, maybe 40 feet, squatted low where the mud met the water. Daryl had wandered off behind the truck to take a piss, leaving Bobby alone with his beer and his smokes and that creeping sense of something not right. The thing didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. Just crouched there, low and still, like a dog waiting for scraps. Only it wasn't no dog. Bobby could see that easy enough in the shape of it. Too tall in the shoulders, too thin in the arms, and pale where the moon hit its skin. Real pale, like something pulled up out of the water that hadn't dried off. Yet he called soft at first, a kind of half-drunk, half-brave. "Hey there," thinking maybe it was some homeless lunatic or a meth head strayed too far from whatever squat they'd come from. Folks said there were camps out here sometimes. Weird little gatherings of burnouts and drifters, lighting fires and talking to themselves in the woods. But this one didn't answer. Didn't shift. Didn't so much as blink. Its head stayed. Low between those knees, arms slack and hanging. Fingers almost touching the water. Bobby felt the hair on his arms stand up. The way it had once when he was a boy and his uncle's old dog had treed a bobcat behind the shed. Something wrong in the air, something waiting to jump. He flicked his cigarette into the dark and watched the red tip vanish into the black water. The thing's head came up slow. Not fast, not sudden. Just a lazy, deliberate lift like it was finally deciding to notice him. And that's when Bobby saw the eyes. Or what should have been eyes. No light in them. None, not a glimmer, not a reflection, not even that dull shine a deer's eyes throw. Back at night, just holes. Deep, dark, bottomless holes where eyes ought to sit. Like staring down the mouth of a cave you knew you weren't meant to walk into. Bobby's throat dried up on the spot. His feet twitched like they wanted to back up but couldn't remember how. Daryl came crunching back through the brush, cursing under his breath about sticker burrs. Bobby hissed at him to shut the hell up, waving him down low like they were hunting or hiding. Daryl just laughed and cracked another beer. "What the hell's wrong with you now?" he said, but then he followed Bobby's line of sight and went still, real still. That can of Lone Star hung halfway to his mouth, his jaw locked tight. Enough Bobby could hear his teeth grind. "What the fuck is that?" Daryl asked, voice gone low and mean with fear. Bobby didn't answer. Didn't know how. The thing just sat there, watching them with those knot eyes, unmoving, unblinking, crouched like it could wait them out for days if it had to. They stood like that for a while, two grown men held fast by something they couldn't name, the only sound, the soft lap of water against the mud and the far-off yip of a coyote running the woods. Then, slow as slow could be, the thing started to straighten. It didn't stand like a man stands. Didn't push up from the knees or brace with its hands. It uncoiled. All in one smooth motion, like a snake coming up out of a coil. Taller than, they thought, leaner than made sense. Arms too long by half, fingers dragging in the wet silt. Its head cocked sideways, listening maybe, or just thinking about what to do with them now. Bobby felt something cold bloom behind his ribs, a deep and awful certainty that if they didn't leave now, they weren't leaving at all. He grabbed Daryl by the elbow and started backing up, slow, careful, like he could feel the shape of its hunger pulling at him through the dark. Daryl followed, beer can forgotten in the dirt, eyes wide and locked on that rising figure. They made it 10 feet before Bobby's heel slipped on a patch of moss and sent him stumbling, backward into the water with a splash loud enough to break. The night in half. The thing moved then. Not fast, not running. Just a step. A dragging, deliberate step forward. Mud slurping at its feet. Head still tilted, still watching. Bobby scrambled up, hard punching holes in his chest, and they ran. Didn't speak, didn't look back. Just ran for the truck with all the blind panic of boys chased by something they couldn't fight. Tires spun in the dirt when Daryl fumbled the keys, engine roaring louder than they meant it to. Headlights. Caught the shoreline as they turned, caught that thing standing there in the open now, arms hanging like ropes, face turned to the glare with no reaction at all. No flinch, no blink. Just waiting. They drove fast and stupid all the way back to Quinlan, neither of them saying a word until they hit. The glow of streetlights and gas stations and the ugly warmth of people living their normal little lives. Bobby smoked 3 cigarettes without noticing. Daryl stared out the windshield like he could still see it crouched out there in the black. "We ain't going back," he said finally. Bobby nodded. "Not ever," he agreed. They didn't. Tell their wives. Didn't tell the boys down at work. Didn't even tell themselves the whole truth when they talked about it later over whiskey and too much silence. They said maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe it was some damn animal, with mange and bad luck. They never said what they really thought, what sat between them in the dark when they tried to sleep. That it wasn't waiting for them, not just them. That it would still be there, crouched at the edge of Lake Tawakoni with its black bottomless. Eyes pointed at the water, waiting for whoever came next. Waiting until they left. The thing about Lake Ray Roberts is that it always feels a little too quiet for how big it is. Locals will tell you it's peaceful, even beautiful, but they say it with this hollow kind of look, like they're trying to convince themselves. Summer afternoons, sure, you'll see families barbecuing near the shore, old men casting lines into the green water, kids splashing near the shallows with neon floaties strapped to their arms. But come sundown, folks pack up fast. Theirs. No good reason given. People just seem to know better. Some nights, if you hang back long enough, you might hear it. Faint at first, like it's traveling a long way across the water. Laughter. Children's laughter. High-pitched and bright, the kind of sound you don't forget. Only there's no one out there. No campsites lit up. No families roasting marshmallows. Or kids running around chasing fireflies. Just the sound, floating out of the dark woods that hug the edges of the lake. I didn't believe any of this when I first heard it. My buddy Jake had been talking about it for years, saying how he used to fish there with his dad when he was a kid. Said they heard things some nights, little voices calling from the trees, soft splashes out where no boat should be. His dad stopped taking him there after a while. Told him some places just weren't for people after dark. It wasn't until I lost my nephew that I really understood. It was late July, hot as hell, and my sister had come up from Dallas to spend the weekend. Her boy, Danny, was 6. Sweet kid, full of energy, couldn't sit still 5 minutes without getting into something. We all decided to head to the lake that Saturday, figured we'd swim, grill some burgers, let Danny burn off steam chasing. Frogs. It was a normal day, nothing strange about it. Sun shining, lake glittering like broken glass, other families scattered around doing the same thing we were. By late afternoon, most folks had cleared out. The sun hung low and red over the trees, and we started packing up, slow and lazy from too much heat. That's when Danny went missing. 1 minute he was there, poking at something in the mud near the water's edge. The next, he was gone. We thought maybe he'd wandered up the trail toward the bathrooms. So we split up, called his name, checked everywhere. Nothing. My sister started to panic, her voice getting sharper, more frantic. Tears already running down her face. I ran up and down that shoreline, past empty picnic tables, through the trees where the light barely touched the dirt. I swear I heard something then, faint, like giggling. High and breathless, slipping between the trunks like smoke. I froze. It wasn't Danny's laugh. It wasn't any laugh I'd heard before. It sounded old, if that makes sense. Not ancient like a ghost story, but wrong, like a record skipping in the background of your brain. When I followed the sound, I found footprints. Little ones, bare, toes pressed deep into the damp earth like whoever made them had been running. They led straight down to the water's edge. Not near the dock, not by the trail, just a stretch of shore thick with reeds and tangled roots. The kind of place no kid would wade into without getting cut up or stuck. But there they were. Footprints, clear as day, stopping right where the water lapped black and still. We called the cops. Search and rescue came out with dogs and boats and spotlights that burned holes in the night. They found nothing. No sign. Of Danny, no sign of struggle, not even a shoe floating near the reeds. Just those damn footprints. They couldn't explain it. They stopped taking our statements after a while, started treating us like we'd lost our minds. My sister never forgave me. She moved back to Dallas and doesn't speak to me anymore. I can't blame her. I went back alone after that. I needed answers. Or maybe I just needed to see for myself that it wasn't some nightmare I'd made up. To cope. I camped there, by the same patch of shoreline, brought a lantern and a cooler and sat through the long, humid dark with my ears straining over the buzz of insects. Around midnight, I heard it again. Laughter, faint but clear, threading through the trees. More than one voice this time, a tangle of them girls, boys too many to count. They sounded close, closer than before. I stood up, scanned the tree line with my light, but saw nothing. Just shadows shifting, leaves rustling in a breeze that didn't touch my skin. Then I saw them. Shapes, small and pale, darting between the trees. Running, hand in hand, their limbs flashing white in the lantern glow before slipping back into the dark. No faces I could make out, just movement. I should have left. Any sane man would have packed up and driven home, but I followed. Something pulled me forward, something deeper than curiosity, heavier than fear. I wanted to see where they went. The footprints were there again. Fresh this time, soft mud pressing around the edges like whoever made them had just passed. I followed them down to the same spot, the same place Danny's trail ended. The water was calm, moonlight painting it silver. No ripples, no sound. Just the prints, stopping at the edge. Then I heard a splash. Not big, not loud. Just enough to turn my stomach cold. Something moving just beneath the surface, slipping away from shore. I thought about stepping in just a few feet to see if I could feel anything below. That's when I noticed the water wasn't reflecting me. It should have been. The moon was bright enough, the angle perfect. But in that black mirror, there wasn't a man holding a lantern on the shore. There were children. A dozen or more, standing ankle deep, staring up at me with empty faces. I don't know how long I stood there before I ran. My lantern hit the dirt, broke, left me stumbling through trees blind and breathless until I found the truck. I didn't go back after that. Not for years. Lately, though, I've been hearing stories again. People hearing things at night, laughter, footsteps, shadows moving between the trees where no campsites are marked. Kids disappearing, just one or two, not. Enough for headlines, not enough for patterns, but enough. Enough to make me wonder if Danny's still out there. If he's one of them now, running hand in hand through the dark, giggling where no light can follow. I dream about that lake sometimes. Not the water itself, but the footprints. Endless lines of them, weaving through the mud, always leading down into that black stillness. And in my dreams, I'm standing on the shore, watching as more and more appear, one after another, until there's no land left, just water, swallowing them whole.